Welcome to Peak City Gym's podcast. We're here with Shane Rabidou and Keegan Hanks. Today, we want to talk about the difference between mobility and flexibility. There is a very stark difference, so we want to clarify that for everyone today. Starting off, let's kind of just define those terms. What is mobility and why is it important?
Well, most people that come in, I think they tell us that they want to improve on flexibility, but what they mean is mobility.
Mhm.
So flexibility is more passive, meaning that if you were to like lay on the ground and I were to take your leg and try to stretch your hamstrings, you're not having to do anything, but your flexibility is just, okay, how far can I push your leg without you doing anything? Mobility is being able to control the muscles through that whole range of motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you need a combination of that having that range of motion, but a little bit of control and strength through that whole range to be able to be mobile versus just flexible.
Right.
And why is that important? Why do we want to distinguish between these two?
Oh, well, yeah. So distinguishing between the two is important because especially when you get to over 40 and in your later years, you want to still be able to do the things out in the community, around your house, living independently. So where, again, flexibility is just passive and you're not the one actually doing anything, it's actually pretty easy to just lay there and doesn't really translate much to your everyday activities where being able to control yourself through ranges of motion, obviously putting things like that together allow you to do the movements that are required to carry out your daily life and to continue carrying out your daily life.
All right, cool. So we mentioned that mobility is a combination of our flexibility, our strength, and our control of the muscles and the joints in those spaces. Real quick, flexibility is that passive ability to lengthen the soft tissues and our joints in these ranges of motion. How does strength play into this type of mobility versus flexibility conversation?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. And there's a couple of different avenues that we can go down. So the first one is there's a saying, and I'll clarify what it means in just a second, but proximal stability equals distal mobility. So what that's essentially saying is that the stronger and more stable your core is, then the more range of motion you're going to have through other joints, whether it be your shoulder, even your wrist, your hips, all that stuff. And the reason for that being is the core's role is to stabilize the spine as well as transfer force. Typically, we're putting force into the ground, and then that's transferring through the core into whatever other limb that we're trying to control. So for throwing a ball, we put force into the ground. It comes up through the legs, through the torso, and then we carry out the motion through the arm. So there's that. And strength training, obviously, is going to help with core strength. The other thing that it's going to help with is the stability of the joint. So we know that ligaments and tendons are very important in terms of stabilizing the joint. And we know from our last podcast that strength training specifically, and I think we said it was at like above 70% of your maximal capacity, helps to strengthen the tendons and ligaments. All right, so when we're working on mobility and we're stabilizing other joints, that's what is going to allow us to be more mobile in other joints. I didn't say that quite too well, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
All right. You can clarify if you'd like to on that one.
Our strength is basically with our joints, and when we're just flexible, it's kind of like a U curve. So when we're really shortened on our muscle, we're going to be on this side. Then we go up, and like if we're talking about our biceps specifically at these 90 degrees, it's our strongest position. It's that top of that bell curve. And then on the other side, in our shortened position or lengthened position, we're again weakest. So with mobility training, we're kind of pushing those limitations and trying to broaden that bell curve or that U, upside down U, trying to increase our strength on those more distal planes of the range of motion. We need to be able to hold those positions and have the joint stable. So the stronger we are throughout, the more stable that joint will be throughout. Instead of having like a really flexible joint, like hypermobility, where we're able to almost hyperextend our elbow specifically, just because it's easy to represent. We hyperextend through our elbow. We're not going to be the most stable and have the most control over that joint in that lengthened position because the ligaments and the tendons are not necessarily strong enough to like really control where that joint moves. So it's a lot more like back and forth and just like play through the joint.
Yeah, exactly. Have you trained a lot of hypermobile people?
I have, yes, and
It's a nightmare.
100% the focus of it is just like really slow, controlled movements because they are just so capable of going to those extremes in either direction, and they just don't have the strength or coming up next, the neuromuscular control of just like knowing where their body is in space. They don't know that they're hyperextending until they're already past that point or like hurting themselves.
Right. And there is a point to like the body tries to naturally align
Mhm.
the joints, right? So when you're hypermobile or if you do have a weak core and the joints aren't aligned properly,
Mhm.
then mobility is going to be restricted.
Mhm.
So like you were saying, those slow controlled movements or even the isometrics where you're getting used to those positions
Mhm.
and finding yourself in space,
Mhm.
especially for hypermobile people, but even
Mhm.
people that aren't hypermobile, that's all part of and a prerequisite to mobility training.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last component of mobility is neuromuscular control or just having control, proprioceptive, knowing where your body is in space and kind of expecting where things should go and how to control those and doing the way you want your body to do. I know training here, training everywhere, you always tell someone to do a certain movement, you demonstrate it, you feel like it's perfect, you know, they tell you they know and understand exactly what they're doing, but they're not able to replicate it. They think they're replicating it, but then you look at it and you're like, this is totally different. And that's kind of the proprioceptive and neuromuscular control we're talking about is you tell your body to do one thing, but you may not be able to actually do the thing that you think you're trying to do.
Yeah, perfect analogy. I mean, I've brought up stories about Brinley before. She's only 2.5, but it's a lot like training and parenting,
Mm.
where I'll like whistle or something like that, and
Yeah.
then Brinley will try and she'll make the motion. She's like, "I'm not doing it." And it's like, yeah, I know. We're almost there. We're gonna get there. We just need some practice and some consistency. But have you ever read? It was an article, and I'm not sure they're the ones who came up with this like theory.
Mm.
But it was by Gray Cook and Mike Boyle called the joint by joint approach to training.
No, I have not.
So basically, if you look at the body, and remember, every joint that requires mobility also requires stability.
Mhm.
All right. So if you look at the body, and we'll go from like ankles up,
Mm.
it's alternating between mobility and stability
Mm.
throughout the joints of the body. So for example, ankles need
Mm.
mobility,
Yeah.
knees stability,
Mhm.
hips mobility,
Mm.
lower back stability, mid back mobility, and so on. And so I think that the interplay between
Mm.
stability and mobility
Mm.
and strength training in proper ways
Yeah.
allows you to move and function in the ways that, again, are going to carry out into our normal everyday life and allow you to keep doing the things that you love.
Yeah. Great. Uh, let's kind of talk specifically about flexibility. I know that is a big component. Why should we not train for flexibility? Why should we not just like go and touch our toes for 30 minutes or whatever? Because we will get better at touching our toes that way.
You will, but you'll also get a huge head rush from all the blood rushing there after 30 minutes. No, so for training for flexibility, and I know that a lot of people, they're like, oh, I do a lot of stretching and things like that. So static stretching, well, let's start with this. So static stretching, when it comes to just improving flexibility,
Mm.
is something that requires actually short bursts of like consistent effort. So you don't necessarily have to do it for 30 minutes, but if you did it multiple times a week, maybe even multiple times a day for like 20 to 30 seconds, it actually, studies have shown that it gives you a better effect long term. However, when we talk about long term, that could take 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Also, it can easily go away,
Mm.
right? And not that mobility can't, but flexibility is just something that, again, isn't really going to translate outside. You're just in these positions holding
Yeah.
a stretch.
Studies have found when you're training for just flexibility through static stretching, you're predominantly just training the pain and stretch threshold that you have within your body or tolerance. So you're not really getting more flexible. You may be getting more flexible with enough time and enough stretching, but you're more just getting your body more accustomed to dealing with this
That
stretch
feeling.
feeling. And that's why we don't necessarily recommend just tremendous amount of static stretching. It's just not very effective in getting the responses that we want out of the body. And on top of that, with flexibility and specifically our demographic here, adults over 40, the flexibility training hasn't shown that it carries over into other actions of daily life. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here in the gym is get better at daily life activities, getting up from chair, walking upstairs, walking, hiking, doing anything that just kind of like makes your life your life. Flexibility was shown to not improve any of those functions, while mobility showed a drastic increase in the capability of people who were practicing it.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. The other thing too is like I just said, the body is designed to have the joints lined up.
Mm,
And so when people are stretching, are you actually stretching with proper form?
yeah.
Because you look at some of the times when people, they try to stretch out things on their upper body and it's like their shoulders are still
Mm,
slumped over. Well, your range of motion when you're slumped over like this and you try to lift your arms overhead, it's, sometimes not comfortable. You're
mm,
not going to be able to get up very high. But if you lock everything up
mm,
and tighten the core, you can get a lot higher. Same thing with a lot of people that talk about hamstring tightness.
mm,
Well, is it that you have tight hamstrings and that they're really not quote unquote flexible, or is your pelvis out of alignment,
yeah.
or is your, pelvis not strong enough and stable enough to support the
Mm,
movement that you're
mm,
looking to
mm,
do?
yeah.
Because your body's going to take, the path of least resistance. It is smart. It is going to prioritize like spinal stability.
Mm,
And so if your spine and pelvis isn't able to control the movement, it will limit your range of motion just as a protective mechanism.
yeah. And it's really interesting. One of the other studies that I looked up when preparing for this is there one specific found that there was no difference in range of motion, which is what most people care about when they're training for flexibility, between strength training, like proper strength training, doing full range of motion, and just static stretching. Now, there are some places where static stretching or flexibility training can do better than strength, dependent upon what your limitation is. But again, it's just being more efficient and effective at our training. If we can get the same benefits from just strength training, then we don't need to spend time holding static stretches.
Well, quick question about that too. Like, so we didn't mention it in our strength podcast, but there's a term called principle of specificity,
Mm,
right? So a lot of times the benefit, it's interesting because that study, and I don't know like how you would design a strength training program with the like flexibility as the
mm,
end goal,
mm.
because if you're strength training, you're almost inherently building mobility instead of just flexibility.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's interesting. But at the same time, and I'm kind of losing my train of thought here on where I was going, but shit,
And
now
that's
I lost
and
it.
that's the goal, or like the key here is when we're strength training, we're improving our mobility, we're improving our flexibility. We're just hitting all of these different things. And ultimately, if you guys have not realized yet, mobility and strength training are kind of one and the same. If we're doing proper strength training, exercise selection, and full range of motion to the greatest of our ability, we are going to start improving all of the different categories within our body. So, yes, mobility and strength training are different, but the intent is similar. And when we're doing mobility training or when we're doing strength training, we're working on similar systems within the body that are going to improve all of the things that improve with mobility.
That's kind of the track I was going on. It's like it's a byproduct,
Yeah.
right? So like when you're strength training or you're working on mobility, flexibility is almost a byproduct of it.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're just doing static stretching, that's literally the intent and the
Yeah.
specific outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah. The other key that is really big, especially again with our demographic, is there was a research study in 65 plus, and they found that static stretching did not improve the risks of injuries in any capacity. And if you really think about it and break it down, it kind of makes sense because static stretching makes you longer and more flexible in exercise or with movement, but that doesn't really train your balance, your stability, your joint strength, which are really just the keys of being protected from injuries, sports injuries, or falling injuries, or anything like that. Especially with falls being very, very prevalent as we age. And we spoke about this in our last podcast how high a risk once you fall, the risk of more falls or more injuries subsequent of that, it becomes more and more apparent that just preventing the original fall becomes really, really important. So if we can do that through proper mobility training and strength training, then we're good to go. But flexibility is not going to improve your balance. It's not going to improve your neuromuscular control. It's not going to improve your strength in any capacity. Or any overuse injuries. Again, that may not be as prevalent with our older population, but I know a lot of people love going golfing, and you can definitely get a lot of overuse injuries from that. Or playing pickleball, especially more recently,
Yeah.
people love that. Tennis elbow and things like that, rolling ankles. Those are all keys that we can work on with our mobility training. That flexibility is just lacking the capability to like improve on.
Yeah, even not even just for our, adult athletes, but mobility is extremely important for things like getting up and down off the toilet.
Hmm.
If you can only squat down a quarter squat, you're going to have a tough time getting off of, lower
Hmm.
surfaces, and that can lead to a whole cascade of
Hmm.
other issues. So, yeah.
The truth about flexibility training after 40 is it makes you better at stretching. And that's really all it does. It makes you better to touch your toes or whatever, but it's not going to carry over into the acts of daily living that are really important for actually improving and feeling like a functioning person, feeling like your old self as we get up there in age and things start to change and limitations become more and more apparent. So we have talked about why flexibility may not be the key that we're looking for and hinted at mobility being kind of the course of action. Why is mobility just really important for us to focus on and kind of like subsequently not really put any effort into flexibility?
Just like what we've been talking about, I mean, the mobility component is what translates
Mm,
to everyday life. You just said that one study kind of showed that there wasn't any reduction of risk
mm,
in injury. So a lot of our adults, they're looking to maintain their quality of life, and part of that is being able to minimize the risk of
mm,
injury. If you do have a fall or something like that, being able to control your whole range of motion through
mm,
all the different joints, making sure you have a strong core.
mm.
Even if you're not, falling properly, I know there's proper ways to fall,
Yeah.
but it goes a long way.
Mm,
And then strength training, like I said, you have extra armor on you to take the hit.
mm,
Whether if you're just focused on flexibility
mm.
training, you're not building any muscle, you don't have any extra armor.
Yeah.
Most likely osteoporosis if you're a
Mm,
woman, that might be a factor, and
mm.
then you have the broken hips,
Yeah.
broken bones, things like that.
Some of the statistics from that study that I found earlier of the mobility training improving acts of daily living, they found an 18% improvement in chair stands, just like the capability of people to do them, being able to do more of them more comfortably. Power, we spoke about in our last podcast how important power was and being able to control that power. Then also time up and to go, which is a common thing that you'll do with PTs or doctors of how long does it take you to get up and start moving forward. And then fall reduction, again, that's really, really critical. We saw a 23 to 34% reduction in falls. Just the ability to either catch yourself or stumble and not fall or fall more appropriately or better for yourself. Doing these things helped improve all of that. So, what is mobility training? We kind of said it is strength training, but what kind of movements are we doing to help improve our mobility?
All of them. No, I mean, I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. So,
Mm,
I alluded to it earlier. I don't know how you would necessarily come up with a strength training plan to improve flexibility,
mm,
but a proper strength training plan, like you had said, will improve mobility
mm,
because You're working on
Yeah.
that core strength. You're
Mm,
working on the stability of other joints.
mm,
And like we talked about, your body is smart. It will prohibit you from moving past certain points of range of motion
mm,
if your core or that joint is not stable enough to do so.
mm,
And that'll reduce your power output actually, because obviously a joint isn't gonna, or
mm,
sorry, yeah, your muscles aren't gonna contract fast and your joints aren't gonna move through a range of motion
mm.
fast if you're unstable.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff that we do, like for specific mobility, we'll do what we call cars. So it'll be
Mhm,
like shoulder cars or hip cars,
mm,
and though that just stands for controlled articular rotations,
mm,
and that's where we're literally moving very slowly
mm.
through the whole range of motion that
Yeah.
we have.
Mm,
And maybe we can put up some videos, for this podcast,
yeah.
but like the T-spine
Mm,
rotations or T-spine windmills are a big
mm,
one. Also T-spine dips, which we have today,
mm,
and then hip cars. Those are pretty common as well. So we'll bless you. We'll try to put some videos up there
mm,
so you know like kind of what it is that I'm talking about. But
mm,
when we put those up, you'll see people going, very slow through the
mm,
whole range of
mm.
motion. And what we're trying to do there is brace through all of them,
Yeah.
brace the core, keep the pelvis stable.
Mm,
For things like T-spine windmills or shoulder cars, I
mm,
like to have people really squeeze their fist tight so that you
mm,
get extra rotator cuff
mm,
activation. So again, we're looking for stability through that joint. You're going to be more mobile with stability, if
mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the types of things that we do here, as you know,
Yeah.
for mobility. Do you have any others that I'm
I
missing?
I think the key with mobility training and what makes it different than maybe typical strength training is mobility training. You want to really create whole body intensity and intention when you're doing these movements. So everything is tight throughout your body. You're not just kind of going through the motions. Anyone can kind of go through the motions and maybe they'll run the risk of higher injuries. But with mobility training, if you're doing shoulder cars or hip cars or whatever, you're trying to constantly push beyond your limits with obviously in your limits. So the limits of your hip mobility of driving your knee up to your chest and like going around those kinds of things, we want to continue to try and use our muscular control to push through any sticking points or limitations that we may have. And that's really the key of mobility, is having purpose behind your movement and not allowing your body to just kind of relax into it. Mobility training should be a workout. It should be challenging. If your mobility training is easy and it feels like you're static stretching or anything like casual, then you're not doing it well enough and you're not really going to see the results that you want to see. It should be difficult. And in some cases, you should even break a sweat doing mobility training.
Agreed.
I hope you guys learned a little bit something about mobility versus flexibility. This is a big topic, and obviously we could go on forever about this, but I really wanted to just get right to the nitty-gritty, discuss what mobility is, why you should start doing it, and we're going to start producing a lot more mobility type content for you on YouTube so you can start to do those exercises yourself at home or when you're here in the gym with us. We appreciate you guys sticking around today, and we'll see you in the next one.